The Imperial military, despite being one of the largest and most technologically advanced forces the galaxy had ever seen, was a peacetime military force for most of its existence. For the first 20 years, the Empire built a military based on the machinations of an evil space wizard, ruthless social Darwinist, and greedy military industrialist. The force they created was massive, orderly, pristine, and completely untested. Once the heavy fighting finally began shortly after the Battle of Yavin, it became apparent very quickly that the Imperial military was severely rotting from within. The choice made by Emperor Palpatine to create a military force that heavily emphasized fanaticism and loyalty to himself left the Imperial military completely unprepared for the dynamic threat that the Rebel Alliance presented. In no place was this more present than in the Empire's officer corps. For every competent officer in the Empire, there were another 3 egotistical, lazy, corrupt, straight up stupid, and sometimes sociopathic individuals leading the Empire to disaster. Today we're going to be talking about those individuals. But before we begin, a word from our sponsor for today's video, Raid Shadow Legends. The premier character building RPG on mobile platforms. It's all about building the best team possible and then putting them through a series of PvP and PvE. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're throwing lightning bolts at my face. I'm trying to read this copy here. Huh? I'm gonna bench all of you. As you continue your journey through the magical worlds of Teleria, you'll get to know your character's abilities, skills, strengths, and which characters work the best with one another so you can develop one of the most unstoppable teams. For the month of August, Raid has a non-stop schedule of special events and activities, including the release of Forge Pass Season 3. They'll also be revealing new champions and new skins for the exquisite champion, Madame Saris. And everyone's favorite champion, Death Knight, is going to be upgraded to legendary champion status as Ultimate Death Knight. This is the best time to get started with Raid, and if you click my link in the description down below or scan my QR code here on screen, you'll get a free starter pack worth almost $30 of cool stuff. We're talking about a free epic champion, Vergus, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, and 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get into the game. All of this will be waiting for you in-game in your inbox. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. If you take a look at his obituary, Major Staz of the 224th Imperial Armored Division died a hero on Mimban in 10 BBY on the front lines. But upon closer inspection, you might be wondering why a field-grade officer died on the front lines in the first place. Usually on the modern battlefield, if an army major is taking fire, he's either in the special forces or your headquarters unit has just been overrun by the enemy, and at this point everyone is basically an infantry soldier. The Imperial Army was supposed to be one of the premier fighting forces in the entire galaxy. You would expect that they would have modern communications and battlefield connectivity that would allow someone like Major Staz, an executive officer, to stay way behind the front lines where he could carefully direct things from safety. So why the hell is Major Staz running around in the front lines telling Solo to get up and take that next hill? A major is extremely important to the day-to-day operations of a battalion. If he dies, then who's going to run the logistics or tell people where to go? It is possible that things were going so bad for the Empire on Mimban that Major Staz just decided to say, screw it, I'm going to go to the front lines. Or perhaps he was a bit too ambitious for his own good. We're going to be seeing a lot of that on this list, by the way. Sometimes incompetent Imperial officers find each other and form a beautiful relationship that actually doubles the kind of nonsense and damage they can do to the Imperial military. Commandant Cumberland Oresco and Taskmaster Miles Grint were both natives of the outer rim planet of Lothal, although you couldn't really tell by their faked core world accents. Commandant Oresco ran the Lothal Imperial Academy, and he sported a more aristocratic surface-level Coruscanti accent.
By the time you complete your training, you will be prepared to serve your Emperor.
While Taskmaster Grint had a much more gruff, lower-level Coruscanti accent.
Squad LRC 077 for your inspection, sir.
Commandant Oresco might have lacked any tactical command ability, but he definitely didn't lack confidence in himself, which is a really dangerous combination when put together. The rebel cell known as Spectre would basically run circles around him. During Lothal's Imperial Day celebration, not only did Oresco and Grint fail to maintain peace during the day's events, they also let the rebel cell destroy a valuable prototype TIE fighter. As a response, Commandant Oresco ordered every exit from Lothal's capital city be blocked, and he personally commanded one of the roadblocks, which the rebels blasted right through. On another occasion, the pair allowed Ezra Bridger, a known rebel fighter, to infiltrate the Imperial Academy and cause general chaos amongst the cadet ranks. These two officers really just had two jobs, and that was to keep the peace on Lothal and run an Imperial Academy. They failed miserably at both of these things. Lothal's mining operation would become increasingly important to the Empire as they ramped up production of large projects like the Death Star and more Star Destroyers. And so the repeated failures of Oresco and Grint would eventually attract the attention of the feared Moff Tarkin. Tarkin would be less than pleased by the pair's 4 failed attempts to capture the rebel Cell Spectre. He would order the Grand Inquisitor, who accompanied him to the planet, to execute both officers on the spot. Grint and Cumberland represented the type of officer you might find on an Outer Rim world like Lothal. This was, of course, prior to the escalation of the conflict on that planet. Later on, you would see more competent officers. Admiral Constantine was in charge of Lothal's sector fleet in those earlier days of the war. He was actually a Coruscanti native, and he had graduated from the prestigious Anaxis War College. His arrogance far surpassed even the commandant's, and for good reason. He commanded a fleet of fearsome Star Destroyers. A fleet commander during this time period in the Outer Rim was basically assigned to anti-piracy and anti-smuggling operations, but Admiral Constantine was seeking the type of glory one could only find in battle. Yet time and time again, when tested, Constantine would allow the Spectre rebel cell to escape from his grasp. And as the conflict would escalate on Lothal, Constantine would see his role in the Lothal sector fleet diminish. The appearance of Moff Tarkin on the planet delegated him to the simple role of ship captain. Later on, when Admiral Thrawn and his 7th Fleet emerged, he was assigned to captain an Interdictor-class cruiser. It was an important tactical weapon, and any intelligent officer would understand that. But Constantine, prideful as ever, saw this as a demotion. He went from a Star Destroyer to a cruiser. And that was because he was the type of officer who had his head stuck in the regulation books and classification books. He didn't really understand that he was being placed in charge of a very, very special weapon. A closer examination of Constantine's career shows us that he's incredibly lucky that he even got that posting. He was captaining Tarkin's Star Destroyer, the Sovereign, when it was blown up. He was responsible for letting the rebel fugitive and future Chancellor of the New Republic, Mon Mothma, escape in the Akron Nebula. He even once accidentally locked a tractor beam on Darth Vader's personal starfighter while he was in pursuit of the Ghost. This was the ship that Spectre Cell used. I guess the only thing that Admiral Constantine was competent at was surviving, and he mainly did this by blaming his own failures on subordinates. It's a classic Imperial officer move. During the Battle of Atollon, the impatient Admiral refused to listen to Grand Admiral Thrawn's command to keep his cruiser in the rear of the Imperial formation. It was supposed to maintain position and keep rebel reinforcements from arriving and prevent the rebel fleet from escaping. Instead, when Rebel Commander Jun Sato went on the attack with a Quasar Fire-class cruiser carrier, Constantine took the bait and engaged the ship by getting closer to it, not knowing that this was exactly what Jun Sato wanted him to do. The rebel commander would ram his carrier into Constantine's, taking out the interdictor and creating an open lane for hyperspace travel for the rebels. The Empire would get the tactical victory at Atollon, but the rebels would ultimately escape with the majority of their fleet, so it was a strategic victory for them. Rounding out the incompetent pre-Thrawn Lothal garrison is young Lieutenant Yogar Lyste, the least incompetent of the incompetent. And that's perhaps because he's a bit younger and we have lower expectations for him, or perhaps it's because he was kind of a decent person. He actually cared about what happened to the local Imperial citizens on Lothal, which you would expect would be like a prerequisite for all Imperial officers, but it clearly was not. Lieutenant Lyste was very ambitious, however, and fanatic about doing his job. At a relatively young age, Lieutenant Lyste would become the Imperial supply master for the capital city on Lothal. And if you watch our videos about the Imperial military, you'll know that logistics was incredibly important for the Empire, and Lothal had many Imperial mining operations and weapons production programs, which made logistics here even more important. However, on a routine relief mission by Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan to Lothal, Yogar Lyste would be fooled by her charming demeanor mixed with a little bit of royal authority. Princess Leia was on the planet on a fake relief mission. Her real job was to allow her 3 Sphyrna-class Hammerhead corvettes to be stolen by the rebels so they could use it in their future battles. Yogar would actually post guards and even magnetic clamps onto these ships, but still his efforts would go to waste and not prevent the theft of all 3 of these ships. One of those Hammerhead corvettes, the Lightmaker, would go on to make one of the most efficient kills in all of the Galactic Civil War, when it rammed a Star Destroyer into another Star Destroyer, which then fell into the shield gate over Scarif, which ultimately allowed the rebels to transmit the Death Star plans off the planet. So remember, a little bit of incompetence here leads to 1,000,000 Imperial deaths down the road. Lieutenant Yogar Lyste would meet his own end after being accused of being a rebel spy by ISB agent Callus, who himself was a turncoat. Governor Pryce was technically not a military officer, but civilian positions like governor in the Empire were not elected but appointed directly by the Emperor. But if there was a significant rebel presence on the planet they were governing, a governor's duties included military leadership. Now, as a politician, Governor Pryce was extremely competent. She actually engineered the downfall of many individuals, including Moff, who was actually once her superior. She even mentored the great Imperial strategist Thrawn in how to become more politically sophisticated, one of the few skills that the Chiss leader lacked. But due to the poor quality of the military leadership on Lothal that we just mentioned in the last few entries, Governor Pryce actually had to assume control of a few operations herself. Her greatest failure was also probably her greatest military success, the defeat of the Jedi rebel Kanan Jarrus. She managed to kill the Jedi, which was no small feat, but she had to take out the entire Lothal City fuel depot to do it. This fuel depot also happened to be the main supply point for the TIE Defender program. The destruction of the fuel source severely postponed the TIE Defender program, which meant that resources allocated for it was redirected to the Death Star. Although the TIE Defender was an extremely expensive starfighter compared to regular TIE fighters, it proved to be an immense challenge for the rebels on Lothal to combat. The TIE Defender was really the only starfighter that could dominate the Rebel Alliance's very robust starfighter corps. Putting more resources into the TIE Defender program probably would have been a much better idea than building the Death Star. Governor Pryce's last defeat would be the loss of Lothal to the Rebel Alliance. She would die inside the Imperial Planetary Occupation Facility as it exploded over Lothal's capital city. Scarif was a beautiful tropical planet full of shallow lagoons and sandy white beaches. It was located far in the Outer Rim and chosen as the location for a top-secret research center and Imperial archive. Its remote location kept all of those Imperial secrets far away from the prying eyes of the Imperial Senate on Coruscant. Apparently, they were too lazy to travel all the way into the Outer Rim to inspect things, and at that time, they still had a little sway over public opinion. Due to the sensitive nature of the information being held on the planet, the garrison posted there was considered pretty high quality. It was made up of mainly stormtroopers and shore troopers. But because Scarif had essentially an impenetrable planetary shield over it, discipline on the planet was pretty relaxed, and that was because of the individual in charge of security on the base, General Sotorus Ramda. He was a pudgy-looking man, and like the rest of the higher-ranking officers stationed on the planet, he was essentially chilling out on a tropical island until he could finally retire. When Jyn Erso and Rogue One launched their raid onto the planet to steal the Death Star plans, General Ramda was so shocked by the initial explosion caused by the raid that he had to be reminded to do something by visiting director Orson Krennic.
Are we blind? Deploy the garrison!
By spreading out their forces and using distractions, the tiny rebel commando team was able to cause chaos all over the military base, which ultimately allowed smaller subunits to steal the Death Star plans. General Ramda, like a lot of guys on this list, had one job, and he utterly failed at it. Ramda would perish with the rest of the garrison when Tarkin struck the base with a Death Star laser. Gunnery Captain Bolvan was stationed on the Imperial-class Star Destroyer known as the Devastator, the personal flagship of Darth Vader. Like many Imperials during this time period, he hadn't seen much combat, and so he became very lazy when it came to his day-to-day tasks. When the Tantive 4 was captured by the Devastator, a series of escape pods were jettisoned from the ship. Lieutenant Hija, who was manning the nearest weapons emplacement, was prepared to fire on those escape pods, but was told to hold fire by Bolvan because no life signs were spotted on board. Had Hija fired on those escape pods, the Death Star plans would have never reached the Rebellion, and then the Rebel base on Yavin 4 would have been completely destroyed and the Rebellion probably would have ended. Also, with the destruction of R2-D2, we might never even get the story of Star Wars here on Earth, because everything in the main story is essentially told from his point of view. Now, once it was found out by Darth Vader that the droids escaped in those pods, Bolvan would cover his ass by filling out a form known as the INS 776TX, which was a mid-cruise extravehicular weapons emplacement inspection. This meant that poor Lieutenant Heecha had to go outside of the ship and inspect all the turbo lasers. This also meant that he couldn't be questioned by Vader and give up Bolvan for making him hesitate on firing on those escape pods. Lieutenant Heecha also hated spacewalks because he got space sick. Now, we did an entire video about Wilhuff Tarkin's many screw-ups, but for one reason or another, Emperor Palpatine kept him around until Tarkin's own stupidity finally killed him. But the biggest damage that Tarkin did to the Empire was his military philosophy known as the Tarkin Doctrine. It correctly diagnosed the huge problem the Empire faced in governing the entire galaxy, but his remedy was kind of idiotic. He believed that by creating a huge threat of force, he could subdue the galaxy's population and make them obedient. Much like how his uncle put the fear of giant alien lions into his heart by sending him into the wild as a teenager with only a spear. Apparently, it was like a Tarkin family tradition. Everything from the Imperial-class Star Destroyer to the AT-AT and of course the Death Star was a direct result of Tarkin's doctrine. If you've seen our last few videos, you'll know that these were not machines built for warfare or to succeed tactically on the battlefield. Instead, they were a part of a larger strategy to scare the entire galaxy into submission. Unfortunately, Tarkin's brutal use of these weapons only aided the rebellion's cause. Wilhuff Tarkin became the rebellion's most efficient recruiter. Admiral Ozzel was such a buffoon that many in the Star Wars community believe that he was a secret rebel agent. That would explain a lot of things, actually. But if you follow this man's career, which somehow went back as far as the Clone Wars, to his most recent posting as a fleet admiral in charge of the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, the Executor, you'll see a pattern of complete foolishness and brashness in this individual. He always lacked intelligence and situational awareness. It's a miracle that he survived as long as he did. Ozzel's luck would finally run out during an operation led by Darth Vader to find out where the main rebel base was located. Ozzel's first screw-up during this operation happens when an Imperial scout droid beams back images from the planet of Hoth of what looks like shield generators. The Admiral dismisses the possibility that the rebels are hiding on Hoth, either because he's lazy or stupid, or again, a straight-up rebel agent. Vader, however, overrules him and tells Ozzel to prepare the fleet to inspect Hoth. Admiral Ozzel sees this as a great opportunity to prove his worth, and so he jumps his fleet directly over the planet of Hoth, instead of, say, on the other side of Hoth stars, so that rebel scanners can't pick them up. Which is exactly what happens. The Rebel Alliance is able to detect the hyperspace signature of the Imperial fleet way before it even arrives, allowing them to prepare for evacuations. Darth Vader, who's had enough of Ozzel's blundering ways by now, chokes him to death through a monitor screen. Before Admiral Ozzel commanded the Executor, Darth Vader had choked his predecessor Grand General Cassio Tag to death right in front of him. And after Ozzel came newly promoted Admiral Firmus Piett. He had correctly identified those Imperial probe images of Hoth as shield generators for the Rebel base, which I guess makes him at least a bit more competent than Ozzel. Whereas his predecessor was a bumbling and loud fool, Piett was a quieter fool, who was quite proficient at shifting blame for his own failures towards others. His short tenure as the commander of the Executor would end at the Battle of Endor. The Admiral had positioned his Super Star Destroyer directly above the second Death Star inside of its gravity well. When an out-of-control A-Wing smashed through the bridge of the massive ship, it killed Admiral Piett along with the rest of the bridge crew. Without anyone in control of the Executor, it slowly veers into the second Death Star and crashes right into it. So there you have it, guys. 10, 11 really incompetent Imperial officers. And let me tell you something, there was a really long list I had to kind of shorten because I can't make an hour-long video. Well, I could actually if I wanted to. And I know some of you guys would actually watch that. But the point is, there's something really wrong with the Imperial officer training pipeline. Maybe we should do something about that next. Well guys, if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.